Hey, it's Sol with another video. We're going to take a break from the endless cycle of hatred that is going through all those horrific visions to talk about a different dead horse, the horse known as faction balance. And we're going to ask ourselves, is it still possible to bring about like some big shift? Is it too late? Is it even a problem? And what sort of whack-ass idea do I have this time around? I touched on this subject a while back, and to be frank, my ideas haven't really changed much from before, but back then we didn't know what was going to happen by the end of a battle for Azeroth, even though I totally called it. And we didn't know that we would be traveling to the Shadowlands, even though many of us figured that out a while back too. First, let's present the so-called problem with faction balance. I can't say that I'm being precise, but I doubt I'm wrong when I say that the majority of competitive players play as the Horde. That's mostly thanks to a snowball effect that started with the Horde races having arguably stronger racial abilities. That led to top players to roll Horde because, for top players, those small percentages matter in the competitive space. That in turn messes with player perception, leading them to believe that they should play alongside these more skilled players because they too are skilled, or they think they are. This isn't what I consider to be the real problem though. According to Blizzard, the raw numbers are evenly split, even if the more specific demographics are not. There's always going to be that competitive crowd that sort of migrates together and moves together, and this shouldn't affect the whole game, just their own little high-profile world. The true problem is, it's a lot more simple. It's a lot more fundamental. Having two factions means players are split in half. There are millions, or, if the haters are right, there are dozens of players on the other faction that we could be playing with cooperatively, or smashing raids, or knocking out quests, or kicking from groups because their IO score is too low. On the one hand, it's like, oh, you play WoW, that's nice, dude. What faction? I play the Alliance. Oh, loser. What was that, Horde bitch? This hatred, or rivalry, from the player's perspective, it runs deep. So deep that Blizzard has had to come out time and time again to shoot down the simple fix that many of us have proposed, to end the faction war, merge the players, give us the freedom to play together. This is a crappy analogy, but it's like building the house of WoW, and the foundation of it is the faction war. It sounds pretty dumb, until you try to work without a foundation, and then you find that what you end up with is just not what you thought. Which means that if WoW was built without the premise of the faction war, we would be just fine today. But the fact that it's been around for 15 years now means that removing it would deal a critical blow to the game's identity. But I'm not here to kill your hopes. I'm here to bring you crazy ideas so that you, the commenter, can kill my hope. Here's the goal of today's design fanfiction. It's simple. Let all players play together. Now, of course, there are a few parameters. One is to preserve the faction conflict. Horde versus Alliance, yeah, we're gonna keep that until the end of time. The roots of WoW will essentially be preserved. Next is to let all players play together. This sounds like a really wild contradiction, right? I mean, how do you bring players together while maintaining the faction conflict? And then 3, just don't break the game in the process, or at least break it as little as possible. Now, these seem like very difficult bullet points to hit, but it's actually much easier than you think. So let's start setting this up, starting with the story, because that's the loophole, the back door, or whatever you want to call it. Anything and everything in game design can be explained away with a sufficient enough story. So, it's the end of the Fourth War after Battle for Azeroth, and everyone is all jacked up. The Horde has dismantled their leadership and rebuilt it with a Horde Council, so we have these representatives of their many beliefs working as this one big dysfunctional family. The Alliance, in the meantime, is holding it together, with the hawkish natures of the Worgen and the Night Elf leadership. Well, that could cause some real conflict down the line. On the political side, both factions face an uncertain future. Neither side has the will nor the readiness to launch a real offensive, but that's not going to matter because pretty soon Sylvanas is going to strike a critical blow against the Bolvar, the Lich King, sending the remaining Scourge on this rampage across the world and uniting Azeroth's factions once again. Later on, you and other champions of Azeroth are going to journey to the Shadowlands, and thanks to being empowered by Azeroth, you're able to travel freely as what will be called the Maw Walker. Side comment, that's a weird name, the Maw Walker. Shorten that and it's called Mawalker. Well, let's talk about our characters, the champions of Azeroth themselves. As much as some would love to have our characters just stick to their roots as an adventurer and play out a more simple story where we're not saving the world or all of existence, we can't deny that we've been doing all this different stuff for years and years. We're special. In fact, we're so special that in many cases we transcend the petty politics of our factions for the sake of defeating the real big bad. We became the leaders of our class orders, we represented Azeroth herself as its champion, and soon we're going to travel to the Shadowlands as a Mawalker and then come back, probably alive still, and with a lot of loot. By the end of Shadowlands, we'll be bigger than death itself. But apparently, it's not within our power to stop this deep-rooted hatred between the Horde and Alliance. This is just one more opportunity for the champions to act on that very sober revelation. In Legion, we looked past our faction affiliations and came together under our class orders. In other expansions, we champions came together under all sorts of different banners, from the Champions of Azeroth, to the Ultima Accord, to the Armies of Legionfall, to the Argent Crusade. In Shadowlands, of course, we're going to unite under these 4 covenants, and faction is definitely secondary, although it's still there just because. I propose that after Shadowlands, the champions return to the land of the living more or less enlightened, no longer bound to small things like factions, and instead focus on what's most important. The defense of Azeroth, of course, because this is everybody's home. It's been less helpful to be the weapon of our faction, and instead, we can be the shield to help everyone else. Solve problems, discover, explore, loot stuff. Remember, Shadowlands is taking place in the Shadowlands, obviously, far and away from Azeroth. Just like Wrath of the Lich King took place entirely in Northrend, and Warlords of Draenor took place almost entirely in this pocket dimension. Stuff is gonna happen in the Shadowlands. There's a story that can be written where the champions emerge from the Shadowlands hand in hand, far detached from their previous faction loyalties. The faction divide never has to go away, but the champions of Azeroth can simply no longer be affiliated with a faction. Here's the crazier part. This can be retroactive to every previous expansion too. Now, this might sound fucking stupid, but let's explore a WoW where the faction divide is dissolved. The main features of a WoW with united champions include that, everyone can play together. Everyone can group together, join guilds, go into dungeons and raids, queue for PvP, all of that stuff. Previous faction restrictions and divides are gone. You might be thinking, oh wow, yeah, okay, that would be really stupid if my level 1 orc can go to Northshire and then pick up human quests there and in Stormwind and other Alliance territories. And you're right, that would be stupid because that's a human quest, not an orc quest. See what I mean? Certain gameplay elements, like quests, will more or less still be restricted to the races that they were originally given to. That much is going to be preserved. So your Blood Elf can go to Borealis without being attacked just fine, but there won't be any quests to pick up. Your human won't be able to play the Horde War campaign because that's not their race's story. Your race as a whole still has a loyalty to their original faction, so you're not going to see Void Elf NPCs hanging out in Silvermoon. But you're not just a member of your race, you're the freaking champion of Azeroth, you're the slayer of dragons and titans. You and the other champions, you're just not seen the same way. Not anymore. It sounds wrong. And I get it if it sounds confusing because it is weird. The idea of being able to walk into the so-called enemy capital and not be attacked? There are exceptions that I'll get into though. I'm just trying to drill into your heads that as champions of Azeroth, you can go, pretty much wherever you want. Your deeds are known. So a guild of mixed races? Yeah, sure, no problem. The faction limitations of WoW communities, yeah, those can be lifted too. And imagine the new traffic going into Goldshire. That place will just explode with, energy. Of course, not everyone is a Care Bear, so not all the same rules will apply as soon as you turn on War Mode, from your original capital city, of course. War Mode will deliver a more familiar feel to the WoW of today. Enemy territory will still be enemy territory. Guards of the opposite faction will attack you just the same. There are, of course, those what-if situations, like what if you're in war mode, but in a party with people in your guild who happen to be part of both Horde and Alliance races. It would take some getting used to, but this isn't really any different from open PvP zones, where people in your party will always be friendly, but remember, this is still war mode. So if the party leader decides to suddenly disband the party, those faction divides will kick in. So yeah, there's going to be some chaos, but that's why war mode is a toggle. You choose to be in that sort of situation. Rising above the faction divide can work from vanilla all the way to Battle for Azeroth and beyond that. Now, of course, there are going to be a few pitfalls. Like in Battle for Azeroth, you and your friends from a different faction are going to have a hard time leveling together because the questing experience was entirely separated by faction. You could still quest together, but well, you're just going to be helping that person quest, and the other person is just going to get experience. It's going to be that sort of thing. And there are many legacy areas in WoW that are also faction-specific. But there are many more areas in WoW that are shared between the two factions. Endgame is largely shared between the two factions. Most of Legion, shared by two factions. The story of WoW can continue along its normal flow with paths that diverge for the sake of faction or race. So we'll break off briefly for those like a detour, but we'll always end up coming back together because that's how it's always been. We always end up fighting together. So in the few final bullet points, what do we end up with? We're going to have players who can play together as fellow champions of Azeroth. We're going to have a war mode option for those who prefer the outdoor faction conflict. Meanwhile, the Horde and Alliance story doesn't change at all. It's more or less designed as unique content to your race's original faction. So as I was writing this, I thought to myself, okay, what's really left? Because I can say confidently that we can design our way forward to where our characters transcend the faction divide, even if the factions themselves never evolve beyond their core hatreds. Every feature that divides us, from PvP queues to how the battle for Dazara lore is handled, all of those have a solution. And the work required to bring about that shift is rewarded with no longer punishing players for choosing the faction that their friends did not. I think that's worth the trouble. The one thing that prevents Blizzard from really lifting this faction divide is probably shared by a few of you. It's just too late. Below, we're likely to see familiar comments about how the Horde and Alliance should never be at peace, or this isn't a Care Bear game, or that this isn't World of Peacecraft, despite this idea having nothing to do with ending the faction conflict. And I think that's because many of us are blinded by now. They can't see a WoW where the champions from each faction can demonstrate just how special they are by letting go of their old affiliations. But I'm interested in hearing some of your thoughts and objections, so share them in a comment below. Don't forget to like the video and support the channel, and to also subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. So thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.